Hey everybody, and welcome back to 7 Billion Geniuses. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. It means a lot to me. Please subscribe and follow me on Facebook if you want to, Twitter, Tumblr, all that crap. Here I'm going to start a series of videos today about the mythologies that exist in our culture. And I'm going to be talking about opposites today, but what I mean by this mythologies idea is that there are a variety of things that we just take up as fact that actually represent things that don't really have any basis, any kind of factual basis, and we take them up as fact mostly because we're just kind of used to hearing about them and kind of assume that they represent something that's real. And so I'm going to kind of be pulling some of those apart. But there's a reason why I'm going to do that. The reason why I think it's so important to try to pull apart some of these ideas is not to have you believe that nothing that you think is true is. It's more important than that. It's actually to put you back in the driver's seat in the context of your life, to realize that, that you can actually make choices in a lot of different ways that maybe you never even thought of before. That there are things that that you've just assumed were actually true that it turns out are not, and mostly they're not because of the way we've kind of been taught to think about things that has us believing that they possibly could be true. So really this is an opportunity for you to take up ways of thinking about you and your life that are completely kind of centric to you, that are familiar to you, that seem good to you, that resonate well with you, as opposed to ideas that have been kind of put together by a culture, sort of rolling forward in a way of just assuming that everything we were ever taught is actually accurate. So today I'm going to talk to you about opposites, and the idea that there really aren't any opposites. This is particularly important in the context of I guess good and evil and notions about right and wrong that are kind of foisted upon us, that are based more in rules and laws than in ethics. An ethical way of approaching life creates many possibilities for us in terms of how we make choices, or really how we kind of resonate with the choices that we tend to make anyway, and moves us away from a kind of a law-based way of thinking about choices that we make that come from arbitrary sources. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to be talking about opposites today. So the idea of opposites. What's an opposite? Rather than trying to debunk every single opposite that you could possibly think of, I'm going to just stick with one. And I'm going to use this one because it creates a possibility of really kind of being challenged and opened up to and available to the enormity of the reality that we actually live in. And so the opposite that I'm going to attend to in this video is up and down. If you think about up and down, the possibility that up and down are actually opposites, you have to think about that. In order to believe that that's true, you have to think about it in a very kind of small sort of way. It has to do with my orientation towards the world, the idea that this is up and this is down, and in a very kind of small context, like for example the screen that you're looking at, the idea that this is up and this is down kind of makes sense. But there's lots and lots of ways that I can challenge that. I mean, simply if we think about the fact that the screen determines what's up and down, all I have to do is this. And then all of a sudden, up and down is completely unoriented. Now that was kind of silly. However, it does speak to something that's true. If you think about, like, for example, there's a cultural assumption. Well, I don't know, it's a very large global assumption. When we look at a map, the map is often oriented with the northern hemisphere on the top and the southern hemisphere on the bottom. Now, having visited places like New Zealand and Australia, they're not particularly happy about that, and don't particularly think about that as a realistic orientation or a definitive orientation. And interestingly, if you flip over a map, if you take a map and flip it over like this, you'll see that there's a tremendous amount of blue, and it tends to make our planet look extraordinarily blue as opposed to green, which is in many ways the foundation of the idea that the ocean is the opposite of the land. But back to orientation. If you think about yourself standing on the earth from a great distance, you very quickly start to get the idea that up and down are really more a representation of our position in relation to items or objects or people or whatever it happens to be. That in the context of the cosmos, the idea of up and down very quickly becomes absurd. And so then the notion that up is the opposite of down becomes more of a functional kind of a practical idea, as opposed to something that's any kind of reflection of something that's actually true. In other words, there is no objective, undisputable up and down. Now, I'm not saying that there's no utility to the idea of up and down, the idea of opposites in the context of that. Elevators, for example. If you get in an elevator and you want to go up and you're going in an elevator that's going down, you're in the wrong elevator. Not that there's a distinct difference between right and wrong, but you get the point. There is some utility to this notion, but only in the context of that kind of functional thing. It does. If we take it up, this notion of opposites, as something that's defining of who we are, it becomes stagnating and limiting. And ultimately, that's the point of me doing this video, is to start a process where many of the ideas that we take up as just simply true can be taken apart if we want to, can be questioned, and in some instances replaced by ideas that allow for perpetual change and a morphing into other things and still other things and still other things. Perhaps the idea that you don't even take up one singular idea, that perhaps you take up this notion of opposite for today and then tomorrow you have another idea. There's no reason why we can't do this. And in fact, the reason why I'm starting this series of videos is to make it more likely, as I said in the beginning, for people who watch these videos, people who read the book, to be in a position more of a control, more of a defining position in the context of their lives, to be able to think about the things that we take up as true and the effects that those have on our lives, the ideas that spin around in our heads and the effects that those have on our lives, and whether or not we're actually satisfied with those effects or would rather have other effects. And in those instances when we would, to take up a challenge to those ideas, to come up with alternatives to those ideas, and to then see how those ideas play out in our lives and change them again if we want to. So the flexibility of our relationships, the ideas that we take up, our notions of the constructions in our lives that we take up just to be true, and to invite us all into a way of living that creates all kinds of possibilities for each of us. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch the video. I really appreciate that you do. Please do subscribe if you can, and do stay in touch. All my contact information is at the end of the video. I'm happy to have people call me. Please send me an email, and I'd love to be in a correspondence with you. But anyway, thanks for taking the time. I'll talk to you next week.